Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us again for I think this is actually episode one of the In Stride podcast. We did an intro earlier. So if you want to find out a little bit more about us and what we're trying to do here at In Stride, go back and give that intro a lesson. But what we alluded to in the last podcast is that Alex and Justin are getting ready for the Unbound 200 gravel race, which is considered one of the premier elite gravel cycling events in the country, maybe the world. It is kind of a top tier event. It's an ultra endurance race. It's 200 miles, and today we are going to get into what the Unbound 200 is. What Alex and Justin have been doing to prepare themselves for this event, getting into both just the training, but more important and more exciting, if you're joining us, you're probably really interested in the type 1 diabetes information and the tips and tricks and the trials and the errors that Justin and Alex have been pursuing and discovering as they prepare to kick some butt in this bike race. So I am less knowledgeable of this bike race because I have not done it. I know Justin has done it and Alex has been training for it. So I will pass it over to Justin to begin with to really explain kind of what the Unbound 200 is and what he is doing, because he is actually racing in the professional class at the highest elite level. And I'd love to also hear, Justin, you kind of unpack what you're trying to get out of this thing.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Nathan. So the Unbound 200 is, or Unbound in itself, I would say, is the highest level, the biggest gravel race in the world at this point. Not just the U.S. It takes place in Emporia, Kansas, typically at the end of May, beginning of June, right around the longest day of the year, and is for the race that Alex and I are doing is 200 miles long with. I think it's on 99% on gravel and minimum maintenance roads in and around Emporia, Kansas. It's been a long time event. I don't know how many years this event's been happening, but it is very highly regarded in not just the gravel cycling world, but just the cycling world in general. And because of that, has a massive participation. I think there's over 5,000 athletes that are going to be racing any of the distances. The 200 is the premier distance at Unbound, but over 5,000 participants, and it gets a lot of media attention as well. So for that, for the elite side, for the professional side, this is like, I don't want to say it's the world championships because there's a lot of controversy on the cycling side on if the UCI Gravel World Championships is the biggest race, or if Unbound's the biggest race, or if Gravel Worlds in Lincoln, Nebraska is the biggest race. But Unbound gets the most media attention out of any of them. So for the pro athletes that are going, this is a top tier A plus event, and I'm excited to give it a crack for my second attempt. Yeah, so yeah, no,
Nice.
my
All right. Yeah, yeah. No, that's a
expectations. Yeah,
perfect. Sorry,
yeah.
that's a perfect intro, Justin, on what the event is. Yeah, that's excellent. So let's get into kind of just your guys' preparations. Like, what have you guys been doing to prepare yourselves for this race? I mean, 200 miles on you know B grade roads in Kansas is something to not take lightly. So, Alex, let's start with you because I know you're a dad and you're, also have a full time job, and so that's a challenge into itself to prepare for a race like this. So why don't you start
Yeah.
off by getting into kind of your preparations, just like your let's start with their training. What have you been doing on the bike and off the bike to prepare your body for this race?
Yeah, and well, really quick too, just as a little bit more background on how I even got to this point, right? I took about 12 years off the bike, and I said to my wife right around like October-ish last year, whenever you could sign up for the lottery for Unbound, I was like, it'd be a really interesting way to get back into cycling is if I did this really gigantic race that I definitely have not been preparing for as long as I should have. And she's like, yeah, yeah, great. thinking there's a 2% chance that I got in, and here we are getting in immediately later, right? So the first bit of preparation was getting over the panic of having to actually like really start training again for a big event, right? But but yeah, I mean, you kind of hit a really challenging point in my training with you know working 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, being a dad to an awesome 2.5 year old who I just want to spend as much time with as I can, and you know balancing parental responsibilities and making sure that right like I'm not just leaving my wife with all the responsibilities so I can go ride a bike. So which for me has meant figuring out how can I get the biggest bang for the buck, right? Like how can I properly do the right rides to prepare for Unbound, with building up some of the endurance rides, really focusing for me at least on just some endurance days because or some endurance plus intensity shorter days
Well,
just due to time constraints.
Alex, I also want to ask you. So,
Yeah.
I guess with the fact that you're, with what you just said, I'm curious, like what that probably also determines what your actual goals are for Unbound, right? I mean, Justin's are clear, like he's a pro cyclist, he's going to get a top place finish. But Alex, like as a father, as with a career, that you've got to, and I think this is good for the people out there listening, because it doesn't matter what level you're participating at, right? And I think, Alex, you're a great example right now. It's like you got a lot of stuff going on, and so but to still be able to throw your hat in the ring and set a goal to do this really hard race, like where are you at and what are your expectations, and then get back into kind of like how you're training to reach those goals.
Yeah. So if you asked me in November when I was thinking about, well, I've got 6 months or so to prepare, I was like, I used to race professionally. I could probably train myself up to get about a 10-ish hour time. And then, reality sets in, right? With toddlers bringing home sicknesses from daycare and the responsibilities and all that. So I think my goal is still to finish probably, I'm hoping in, let's say the top 10%, right? Just looking at past results and things like that. I think that's an attainable goal. And hopefully better, right? But we'll see what actually shakes out. I think that one of the important things that I've realized as I've been training through this is taking a good hard look at the training I've been able to do versus the training I wish I was able to do if I was able to ride as much as I wanted, and try to just be adaptive to that and realize that what I'm no longer in the position Justin is where he needs to work for results to continue with the sponsorships, right? Like I'm out there to have a good time, finish strong ideally, and the other big goal, right, is just have a really successful diabetes day. Like I think for me that would just be really cool. I've been practicing and training the nutrition and diabetes side, but like being able to get to the end of say an 11, 12, maybe more hour day, like, and seeing a pretty consistent blood sugar graph would be pretty killer.
That's cool, man. That's actually like a really fun added benefit of being a type 1 diabetic, is you get to have these other little challenges that you get to pursue while, everybody else just, has to be bored only racing their bike. So, I mean, so cool to have that extra little goal of yours to, use this as an opportunity to refine your diabetes management and your protocols and how it all kind of fits together. So, super cool, man. I
At the
love
end of the day, I can say, well, I didn't finish anywhere close to the podium, but like I did finish on the podium in diabetes management, so that's kind of a win, right?
Yeah, I love it. I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah, I think
Or I
that's
had this horrible number, but I was able to still finish. And so,
Right.
you
Yep.
win
Yeah.
no matter
Yeah.
what happens.
yeah, I think you're
Yeah.
still you might still be underselling it. Just getting through Unbound in itself is an achievement,
Yeah.
and right there, it's 200 miles is no joke. 200 miles not on pavement is even more of no joke. And considering where these roads are. Like a lot of the minimum maintenance roads are, they're pretty tumultuous and can lead to like mechanicals on the bike, and then like we're adding diabetes management on top of that. So we have a lot of things to make sure stay in check and in stride. There we go, another in stride pun.
Little plug.
Yeah, little plug.
I love it. I love
But
it.
yeah, just to
Well,
get to the finish line. So anything on top of that is,
Yeah.
yeah, icing on the cake.
what's really cool about what you're mentioning there too, just on the diabetes side is, as I was saying, I've been kind of out of the cycling endurance sports game for a while. Tried my hand at some marathons here and there, some a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but never really had to dive into what the new sports science has been saying. And I'm like totally geeking out on it these days. Like I'm just constantly looking at, this, that, or the other thing, tire width, tire size, wet pressure, and then like most importantly, like nutrition, right? And so, Justin, I'm curious on to what you've experienced here a little bit, but like one of the coolest realizations I had, and actually, Nathan, this came from reading that was it Stack
Oh, Substack. Yeah.
Substack. Thank
I
you.
made a little, put a little article and just an experience I had.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talking about, some of my experiences. We can get into it later. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. But like, I mean, just like reading through that, it sparked this thought about, hey, you know what? Like, there's this idea that or not an idea. It's like it's a fact, right? Insulin shuts off your glycogen response, and so I'm sitting here thinking, okay, cool. I can ride my bike for 6-ish hours and eat a whole bunch of carbs and things like that, and still feel like I have some power at the end. But okay, now double that. I'm like, I actually am a little worried about my glycogen reserves just through that. And I was like, I wonder if we could actually just try to like up the amount of insulin and match that with carbs to basically tell my body to not produce glycogen or not release glycogen, I should say, for the first few hours of the race. Because let's say if I have enough for a 6-hour race and I delay it for 3 hours, now I'm 9 hours in and I still have some reserves. And I'm like, and that's just been like the really cool diabetes side of things, I think, is just being able to like, okay, what happens if I increase the insulin a little bit and like try to lower my blood sugars beyond, normally I'm at about I've been trying to stay at around 200 because I feel like that's enough of a buffer. Like if my pump gives me a little bit of insulin, I don't want to crash low and just be chasing it with carbs. But this whole process and through this idea, I've actually now been riding at like 130, 140. I just feel so much better. And like, yeah, I don't know. We'll see if it actually works, next Saturday. But
Interesting. That's cool. I want to get into more of the details on your diabetes protocol, Alex. One more question on your preparation for the thing.
Yeah.
Just because I think the listeners will be curious. What kind of like training hours are you putting in to prepare yourself for a full-time working dad, but also a big ultra endurance event? I'm just curious what it takes.
Probably not nearly enough.
It's okay. Let's hear it.
But so I think my biggest week was probably around 16-ish hours. But really, really my goal has been to focus the training a bit, make sure that there is enough big endurance days, and living in Colorado, we have an ample supply of mountains to ride over, which is definitely different than Kansas. But that also means that I just get time in the saddle, right? Going up a mountain pass is slow and requires endurance power the whole way. So just kind of getting in a few 8-hour, rides, 6 to 8 hour rides, a couple stacked, 3 to 4 hour rides. But then during the week, it's like definitely a lot of, well, we'll do an hour to an hour and a half and chuck some intervals in there. And I will say the one thing I know that I've not done well is active recovery rides, because it's way easier just to be like, let's hang out. I'd rather hang out with my family than go sit and spin at 95 watts.
Man, Alex, so I'm not sure active recovery is a thing that parents, and I don't know if that's a thing that weekend warrior parents with jobs do. I think that active recovery is something that elite athletes that have time to train do.
Yep.
And so that's a perfect segue into Justin, what's kind of been your preparations as we head in for Unbound 200?
Yeah, so training and preparations for Unbound is this year the biggest race on my calendar, and because of the media attention it gets, the caliber of the field it gets, either achieving a top result can bode very well for a future in the career of professional cycling, but also having a strong performance, whether that's being maybe doing something silly and like getting in a breakaway for half the race and spending all the glycogen that I have stored up in the first 5 hours, but making making the race hard and being active in the race is also a very important part of the whole business of bike racing, right? So my preparations have been a little bit different this year. Last year was my first year. It's 200 miles, the longest event I've ever done. I well, like I mean, I honestly had no idea what to expect going into it, and like longer endurance days have always been kind of my bread and butter. Usually done well at that. I'm pretty good at sitting at tempo for however long you want to sit at, and being in Kansas, it's typically a little bit cooler than Texas is at the end of May, so the heat that usually happens at Unbound is a non-factor for my race, and it actually ends up being a little bit of a performance boost. So the endurance and like getting through the race isn't as much of a question this year, and it's more how can I use this race as something to help my career, either with a result or a strong performance. So I've been focusing a lot on riding really hard for as long as I can to like try and be active in the race a bit more than I was last year. But that being said, I've been spending a little bit more time on the bike than Alex has, thankfully, because I have no real life responsibilities, so that helps for sure. I think my average hours for the year is probably about 20 hours a week, and I think for the last month it's probably a little closer to like 24, 25. With there's been several days over 7 hours, and I actually just did my longest ride in the training, was an 8 hour day, like a few days ago. So that was 10 days before the event. Was 8 hours, and the average temperature for that ride was 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The last 4 hours, the average temperature was 101. So while that might not be great for training numbers, for power numbers, it's definitely good for heat adaptation and then like all the performance benefits that does, like increased blood plasma volume and like increased oxygen uh, transfer to your cells and whatnot. And for an event like Unbound, it's kind of rolling terrain, no long climb. It's a little punchy, and really you need to be able to be on the gas for the latter half of the race more so than the first half of the race, which is the last 5 hours of the race, which is that's kind of a crazy thing to say. Um, Using these long training days are much more of a benefit for my ultimate goal of being active and aggressive in the race all day long.
Awesome. So I'm curious now. I think this is where the listeners have been patiently waiting for us
Go.
to get to. And so I really want to hear about your guys's diabetes protocols. And again, I want to just like say, to the listeners, this is not advice. This is kind of just curiosity's sake, right? To kind of bounce off what you're doing with what Justin and Alex is doing. I'll share some of the things that I'm doing with my own pursuits down the road. But it's kind of one of those things that you got to remember that, like, causation doesn't necessarily equal correlation. I think I got that right. It was kind of a play off of the old research
Yeah.
adage that correlation doesn't equal causation. And it's kind of the same thing. Is It's like, this is a very individual disease, and our bodies all respond slightly different to training loads and insulin and rest and recovery. So this is more of just to have the conversation, because this, again, one of the things that Alex and I and Justin have all benefited greatly from, just being surrounded by other elite athletes managing type 1 diabetes, and hearing what they're doing, and just like, you know, thinking about our own diabetes protocols and what options are out there, and, working with your doctors to kind of find the best fit for you. So with all that being said, Justin, why don't you feed us a little bit about what you're doing? Like, what are you pumping? Are you looping? What do you got going on with your diabetes management right
Yeah,
now?
definitely. So that that is a great segue. I guess it wasn't even a segue. I was just pointing straight into it. So, been living with diabetes for a long time, and I have been using a pump for the majority of uh, the last 10, 15 years or so. So a lot of experience with pumps and CGMs as well. Currently pumping and on a loop system. But for I have found I really like being hands-on with my diabetes management. And there's a lot of times where I think looping is really good for overnight and sleep, but then during the day when I have a workout and have recovery and have intervals I need to do, I like to be a little bit more hands-on and am actively either administering insulin or like fully unplugging my pump at times to make sure I'm getting insulin when I want and not getting insulin when I don't want it, to make sure my blood sugar is where I want it to be and will predictably be where I want it to be based on what I know is coming up in the ride. And I haven't been able to find a way to like have a pump system or a loop system work predictably in the future for workouts like that because that just doesn't exist yet, right? And it's a very niche case scenario. So there is I do use CGM as well, and one of the honestly the most useful most useful training tool I have is my CGM, and I'm currently using a Garmin head unit. Not sponsored. Love to work with Garmin, but they don't. I bought this, but I have a CGM data field on my Garmin, so every second of the ride, I can see where my blood sugar is at and where it's trending. And that is incredibly useful for me because I'm able to see what I'm doing athletically, the food I'm eating, like Alex was saying, 120 grams carb per hour. I'm actually a little bit over that for training because I'm shooting for like 150, 160 on race day, and I
Ooh.
like to train pretty close to that so that I can get the gut ready to have of geez, it's gonna be like 1,500, 1,000, yeah, 1,500 grams of sugar for the race at Unbound, and that in itself is crazy. But then we're managing diabetes on top of that, so being able to see where your blood sugar is at as quickly as possible and for the entire and as easily as possible is something that I find incredibly useful. And for a lot of these training days, they're longer, but there's not as many short, sharp efforts with which are typically, in my experience, a little bit more difficult to manage diabetes throughout because like there's adrenaline dumps, like really hard bursts of energy, and then like you get the adrenaline, spikes your blood sugar, adrenaline wears off, blood sugar comes crashing down, and if you're on a loop system or unaware of this adrenaline dump, you might be giving insulin for those adrenaline spikes, but it's not actually like a high blood sugar from too much sugar in the blood or some, I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't actually know what that actually is there, but it does make the blood sugar go up. But it does not last. And using that CGM data field for the entirety of the race or training days helps me predictably eat the really high number of carbs I need per hour to maintain the effort I need for the training days to get the proper training in. It's kind of like one step after the other to get these big days in.
All
Yeah,
right,
no,
I got to
that's
if I
awesome.
can ask one question.
That's
Yeah.
really
Real
helpful,
quick.
Justin. That's cool to hear it's really cool to hear, just your system that you're using. But then it's mind-boggling to me. I mean, if the listeners missed it, to hear how many grams of carbohydrates you're ingesting per hour, and just to also realize to uh to know that it takes insulin to shuttle that sugar into the system, into the muscles. And so this is the trial and error, find out the ratios that make sense for you. But you know knowing that like Justin's out there racing 200 miles, I don't know what your time goals are, but it's around 8 hours,
Yeah.
let's just say.
Yeah, closing to
um
I think 9. Winning time last
okay,
year
yeah,
was like
okay, yeah,
9:15. So we're like we're
I'm
shooting for like 9.5,
yeah,
9:15.
yeah.
So
But I mean, to be to be taking insulin throughout that whole process, and just being aware of it and using the tools as that gas gauge and that window into the metabolism is epic. And Alex, I interrupted you, man. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, you're good. I picked up on something Justin said on what
Mhm.
he was doing that I've like never thought of, and I just need to ask this question. You said you've been
Yep.
like actively disconnecting your pump
Yeah.
because are you on a tube pump?
Yes, I am.
Okay. How can you possibly manage to disconnect your set during a race? Or actually, probably that part's probably a lot easier. More reconnecting it seems a lot harder to me. It's something I've never considered.
Thankfully, with the two pumps I've used, I think it's super easy, and I always for the last. I honestly I probably should be changing my pump sites, like the location of them a little bit more, but I've been using my butt for the majority of the last, I'd say 5 to 8 years, and it's super easily accessible. Like you can just kind of like feel through the spandex on the side of your butt and like pinch it and like pull it out, and then sometimes it kind of gets like jostled around and you got to fish for it a little bit and like kind of like get it back to the same location of where the pump side is and like just click it back in. But I haven't found that much of an issue with it. Sometimes it gets a little tricky, like and
Okay.
especially if it's like super bumpy road, like you got to be really careful with only one hand on the bars, like trying to connect and disconnect it. But I mean, it's the easiest way to just stop getting insulin. Like if you see your blood sugar going a little bit further down than you want it to, and like I think you were mentioning
Yeah.
earlier, using insulin for glycogen, like using insulin to save glycogen is it's a very fine line because when we're working out, your insulin sensitivity, or mine at least, is
Oh, it
extreme. It
skyrockets.
just goes through the roof. But it might not be that high at the beginning of the race, but then like 5 hours in, it's a little bit higher, and then in the last 2 hours, like it's
Yeah.
insane. Like a very small amount of insulin is going to have a very large impact. So it's figuring out just the right amount of insulin to get at just the right time to maintain the 150, 160 grams of carb per hour from hour one through hour, hopefully nine, maybe 10. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Nice.
cool. That makes. I just like was thinking back to the days of like NRC crits and just going like, if I had to disconnect a tube pump during a crit when you're like, make sure you got to follow an attack or like,
Yeah.
you're barreling around these tight corners at 30 plus miles an hour. I'm just like,
Mhm.
that just
Yeah.
couldn't imagine,
Don't
the
do it
risk
mid
of it.
don't do it mid turn. Mid turn's a bad idea. You got to be on a straightaway.
Yeah, don't be messing with your pumps during a US crit. You're not gonna make friends. Keep your
Yeah. Oh,
No.
keep your focus, Alex. All right,
I'm
so
not gonna
hey,
be. I'm not ever doing a crit again. I don't think
so
so. It's all good.
Alex, I'm curious then. What do you have going on, man? What systems do you have
Yeah.
working for you as you head into Unbound?
Yeah. So since I got into like the full time job of being a software engineer, that's kind of like pushed me into this technology side, and I have actually been using this open source looping system on my Android phone, which I mean, for me, has just worked out awesomely. Like I have, it's kind of gotten me to the point where for the last for 2.5 years or so that I've been using it, I've had to like think about diabetes only to remember to change my pump and change my like CGM site. Like
That's
that was really,
awesome.
oh, well, until let me reframe that to say until I started riding a bike again, because that adds the new wrench into the scenario where you have to do a lot of different things. But
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, so before I picked up the bike again, it was kind of just like just fell into the background through these. It's a more aggressive looping system than you'd get on say like Omnipod, Tandem, Medtronic, and things like that. But so what I've been doing in this Unbound training is actually working with it and like kind of setting profiles, right? Like I have my main profile that has my insulin sensitivity factor, my carb ratio, things like that. Which admittedly I rarely use the carb like inputs, and for context, what that does is if I say, hey, I just ate 30 grams of carbs, it would put that into the system, and then my phone, the app will connect, like calculate how much insulin I need to give and kind of adjust based on how my body's responding to it. Um, But and a lot of times, if you're kind of eating like low-ish glycemic index foods, you don't even need to put that in. With cycling, however, right, as Justin, you mentioned, we're drinking sugar water, basically. I mean, and actually, that's exactly what I'm doing. I've got like this. I've got a whole bunch of little buckets in my house of like literally powdered sugar and maltodextrin and a little bit of flavor adds that I just pour into a bottle. Um, Honestly, I did
Justin,
that. Go
I'm
ahead.
curious. I want to pause on this because I feel like we've kind of brushed over this a little bit. I think there's some details that I'm curious about. So, Justin, you said 100. Did I hear that right? 160 grams per hour.
Yeah.
What products are you taking? Alex just said he's just drinking sugar water. What I guess what products are you using? What do you like? What tastes good?
Yeah.
Because that's got to be an element of it too, and what works for your gut.
Yeah, it's huge, and the like, especially for an event like Unbound, or honestly any cycling event with this high carb intake, the ability, like, you can eat as much as you want, but if you're not going to keep it down, it's not doing you any good. I am working professionally this year with flow formulas, and I do use a mix of both drink mixes and gel mixes to get to this 150 grams of carb per hour. But I also supplement that with, like, and specifically I'll be supplementing with this in the latter half of the race with a homemade gel mix of maple syrup, honey, and salt, and that's the right glucose fructose mix to get the two types of carbohydrates for maximum absorption. And I'm using that later in the race when those glycogen stores are likely going to be more depleted, insulin sensitivity is super high, and it's a little bit more. I don't want to say it's more important then, because it's important the entire race, but it's it's much easier at the end of a super long, super hard race for your blood sugar to just tank if you are either riding too hard, or happen to get just a hair too much insulin, or go through all the food you brought because you ended up needing 175 grams of carb per hour. And I'm saving that for later in the race when it can really be effective. But it's a mix of mostly flow formulas, drink mix, gel mixes, and then the homemade maple syrup and honey for probably the last 2-3 hours.
Um, a question just popped into my brain. I want to hear
Mhm.
from both of you guys. What is that's helpful. That's pretty interesting stuff. Especially, I know there's a lot to unpack there with the glucose absorption
Yeah.
science, and you kind of hit on it with the fructose, the glucose, and the three different types of sugar molecules that absorb. But I am curious, as type 1 diabetics, what is your guys' target range? What's your go fast number?
That's a good one. Yeah. Sorry, Alex, didn't mean to butt in
Oh
there.
no,
Yeah.
I mean,
For
we're both excited to answer this question. So,
yeah, I get that's a good thing, right? For me, I like being 150 to 180. Narrow range, but that's I feel I feel great there. I don't feel slow. Yeah, and that's go fast. 150 to 180.
Nice. What on the high range? What starts to become a concern?
I would say over 240. If I see 200 going up, not not too much of an issue. If I see 220 going up, I might start thinking about, like, making sure the pump's plugged in. And if
Mhm.
we're over 220 and it's still trending up, I'm most likely going to pull the pump out of the pocket and give a small dose of insulin, either
Mm,
mid-ride or mid-race.
got it. And so same question. What's like the low where you start to like make corrections when you see like what number do you try to correct from?
If I see anything under 120, if it's 120 or lower and trending down, we're going for the maple syrup and honey, because I know that's the quickest way for me to get my blood sugar back to where I want it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Alex, curious, same question. What's your go
yeah.
fast number?
So, if you would have asked me this question 2.5 months ago, I was going to say 200 to 220. And the rationale there was just not riding nearly as much, and kind of having that like experience on exactly what my body's responding to. And that 200 number gave me a nice buffer, right? Like if I start to see it trend down, I've got enough time to just shove carbs in my mouth to ensure that it doesn't really hit a low number. But since I started this kind of new plan in the last couple months of adding some insulin to the system, it's lowered my blood sugars, and I'm kind of been sitting at like the 130, 160 range a lot, which has been really, really cool. And kind of one thing I've noticed as well is like that adrenaline spike that you always get at the beginning of a race. You know, like I'll usually take some carbs on before the start. Like I've done a few test races just to see how my nutrition plan is going to go. But I'll usually just shove a 50-gram gel in, you know, maybe 20, 30 minutes before the race. So that way, when everybody is inevitably going too hard at the beginning, you know, I've got some carbs on board to stick with that. And then the adrenaline of that. Like there's been a few times I've seen my blood sugars in the 350 range at the start, just from the nerves, the adrenaline, the breakfast I had, things like that. And you know, if that's the case, maybe I'll give myself like an extra half unit or so, which for me is normally not nearly enough, and just kind of know that if I consistently, you know, still follow my nutrition plan, I'm going to settle in probably the next hour or so where it's going to drop and it's going to kind of tail off. So um, that's been kind of a helpful realization to learn too.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you mentioned, that adrenaline spike at the beginning of the race, to know that like really it's about, I think a lot of diabetes management is understanding the factors that are affecting your blood sugars. And so, you know, totally normal to have this like this adrenaline happening behind, you know, before the start of a race. And what is adrenaline doing? It's getting you ready for fight and flight, right? It's the body's fight or flight response. What that's doing is it's getting your body prepared for battle, you know. So it's actually taking some of that stored glycogen, putting it into your blood so it's ready, so you're ready to go fast, right? And so to know that, okay, that's why my blood sugars are high, because they're supposed to be. I'm supposed to have this added sugar in my blood so I can be ready to rock, and not, you know, be scared, frustrated, and overcorrect in that situation. But like you said, Alex, maybe just start to shuttle some of that extra sugar into your muscles, because that's what's happening. You know, that's what it's there for.
Yep.
So to use a little bit of that insulin, and to not overreact, and to know like what's going on, why it's happening, and to manage it that way is pretty awesome. So that was cool to hear how you
Yeah.
manage
I
that.
mean, I will say too, right? Like if I'm getting further into the race or the ride or the, you know, event and I'm still in the 300 range, which is sometimes possible because, you know, if you don't want to overreact, the natural thing is you might accidentally underreact, right? And which,
Mm-hmm.
so at that, you know, at that rate, you know, I'll just kind of keep managing, keeping an eye out. It's kind of hard to pull out my phone to give a bolus all the time, right? Especially on a gravel race where it might be, you know, let's say you're hitting like a single track section or a really chunky section of road. Like that's not exactly easy, and you got to kind of stay with the pack if you want to, you know, just kind of get that free ride along, unless you want to just time trial the rest of the day, right? So just kind of being cognizant of what's happening, and you know, maybe at that time, you know, like maybe I'll have to skip a little bit of some of the sugar, you know, that I'm trying to consume or something like that. But just kind of finding that balance. But you know, it's been an interesting experience working with adding insulin into my training or my like
Mm-hmm.
my actual riding, because what I've noticed, I kind of just tend to tail off. I'll get down to like 100, but it doesn't actually significantly drop. The way I've been doing it is I set some carbs at the beginning. I'll say like, hey, for I think my max I have set allowed is like 120 grams. I can't like say I'm eating more than that, so I'll set like 120 grams over a duration of the next 2 hours, and then at that, and then I'll set another one to delay 2 hours. So basically, I'll say like, hey, I'm ingesting 240 grams of carbs over the next 4 hours, which is less than I'm actually going to be consuming, but that tells my, you know, looping system, hey, I'm putting a lot of carbs in my system. Give some insulin, give some insulin. So over that 4 hours, there's just that like bit of added insulin into it, which I think, you know, for me, somewhere around like having a half to a unit of insulin on board is probably enough to slow down that glycogen response, which is kind of the key goal, right? And And knowing that that insulin is going to tail off around 6-ish hours into a ride, that's when I start to normally see my blood sugars down in that 100 range. I also know that the insulin is out of my system at that point, or like close to out of my system at that point. So I don't need to panic about, wow, I still have insulin in the system. I'm 100. That means I need to, have as many carbs as I possibly can stomach, right? Because it's not going to go much lower if I'm just staying consistent, which I think is honestly one of the hardest things so far in this training block is just being like, okay, if I have too much insulin in the system, I need to just be ingesting. I think I did one ride where I had low glycogen stores. It was hot. It was just a really bad day for me. I think I had like 850 carbs in the course of 4.5 hours just to keep my blood sugars up. And like half of that was in like the first hour and a half. I couldn't eat enough carbohydrates, which inevitably leads to GI issues. You just start to feel kind of crappy. And that's a real problem if your blood sugars keep dropping and you can't stomach any more carbs, because the only solution there is to ride your bike at a very slow pace or maybe even stop.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's not awesome if you have those issues, but I liked your responses. That's, I think, super helpful, guys, to just hear as a type 1 diabetic, to hear what you guys are doing and how you're approaching some of these challenges and some of the trials, some of the errors, Alex, that you just kind of talked about. But the reality of like, oh yeah, I mean, sometimes it doesn't go as planned, and we'll step back and we'll learn from it and we'll make adjustments and we'll get this thing dialed in. Like I said, we're so fortunate as athletes, because we do have these devices that give us just this awesome window into our metabolic systems. And so that kind of brings me, like, you both have kind of talked about your technology that you're using, but I am curious, just you're like, let's each share like your favorite piece of technology that you're just so stoked on right now, and like what you wouldn't be able to do without, technology wise. Justin,
Yeah, for me,
what's yours?
hands down, see a reliable, accurate CGM that I am seeing on my head unit. That is 10 out of 10 right there. The most useful tool I have, both like by in any capacity. Obviously for my diabetes life, but I would say for my cycling life as well, because obviously I can't be riding my bike if I'm not managing my diabetes. So having that on the head unit for every second I'm on the bike has made my life on the bike incredible. I'm yeah, super stoked
Yeah,
with that for sure.
nice.
And I think
Okay,
it's
so
kind of
follow up.
important to, oh, here,
Oh,
real quick.
I want to have a follow.
Oh,
Hold on,
oh man.
sorry,
Okay.
Alex. I have a follow up question on Justin's answer.
Yeah.
He talked about the Garmin head unit.
Mhm.
Mike, I'm not sure how those work. Are those do those read from basically the CGM to the phone to the unit, or does it go straight from the CGM to the head unit?
Yeah, it's a
In
relay
this,
from the phone. It's
yeah,
yeah, which is not the most streamlined it could be. Obviously, if the head unit was acting as a receiver, that would be best case scenario, so I don't have to have my
yeah,
phone on me. But it works well enough, and especially for Unbound, I would have my phone on me anyways, because like everyone's texting their aid station support and getting texts from people further on the course, or like your staff that are further on the course, to like for course conditions and whatnot. So I'll have my phone on me either way, and it is just a relay. Ideally
uh,
it's not, but it is currently.
yeah. That was kind of a leading question for me, because I will throw out a little note to the product managers out there that having that direct from CGM, the unit, straight to the device is kind of game changing. It is, I will say, it is the only reason I'm using both the G7 and an Apple Watch, is because right now that's the only, from what I understand, that's the only place where you can have that direct from sensor to, in this case, wrist unit.
Mhm.
And to not have to have that phone is massive. So for all those product managers out there, like this just needs to become table stakes,
Yep.
in my opinion.
Yep.
Let's ditch the phone. We just like, it's not necessary.
I love that.
It's interesting you say that, because I run everything off of my phone. I mean, I agree with you. I agree with you, but you know,
again, like these are all like, these are all like kind of personal
yeah,
caveats and what works for us and what works for me. It's like, for instance, when I'm surfing, I
you can't have your phone.
I can't take my phone with me, and being able to have my numbers on my wrist is
That's huge.
it's life changing, right? I mean, it's
truly.
So there's lots of situations where I can't have my phone with me for whatever I'm doing. If I'm free diving, if I'm surfing, if I'm in the water, a lot of times I just don't want to have my phone with me. If I'm on like a trail run, I just don't want to carry my phone. I don't like having that thing in my pocket or in a bag. I like to go pretty light. And so, yeah, just that's my that's my wish list for all the products out there, is like, I just straight to the device, guys. I'd be stoked.
Yeah,
Alex, you have a different take because you're running everything through a phone. So what's your one piece of technology?
Yes and no, right? Because like I also have a data field. I'm running it through a tool called Xtrip, right? So it's still a relay. So I would like it, but it's not always the most reliable. It doesn't, sometimes it misses signal and you go 10, 15 minutes without it. So I agree with you on that, but I've also resigned myself to always just having my phone with me. And which is exactly on the same level of the technology that I'm stoked on is these open source looping systems. When you configure them to work properly, I think they're life changing. I mean, I mentioned how little focus I've had to put into diabetes outside of like ramping up with cycling here over the last few years, and then even through the cycling endeavor, like I've got my main profile for every day, and then I've been able to create like a few exercise profiles. Just say like, I'm going to turn this on for this time of for this length of time, and you can actually stack them. And so like for Unbound, I'll have a few different ones. Like I'm expecting my insulin sensitivity to skyrocket. Well, it skyrockets because I'm riding, and then it's going to continue to increase throughout the race probably. So I'll probably say, hey, we're going to start here at a baseline. After 5 or 6 hours, it's going to automatically switch to this other field, and then 7, 8 hours, things like that. And so for me, it's the coolest thing, and it's a little bit more aggressive, like I mentioned earlier, than the ones that you get through Tandem or Omnipod or things like that. But that means it's willing to give me enough insulin, and I've learned to trust how much it's giving, and pair that with the Garmin, or the field on the Garmin head unit of here's what my blood sugar is and here's my trend. I think that's one giving me a lot of cool insights, like realizing if I start a ride, the one example that I gave earlier of just like pounding carbs to keep my blood sugars up. I realized right then my blood sugars are dropping because I have like low glycogen stores today. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this, right? It's kind of an indication of like how tired you are, how fatigued you are, and you just kind of, you ask for a piece of technology, but I think the better response in my opinion, is the integration between pieces of technology and how they all work together, right? Because there's so much information we can gather and manipulate, and insights we can gain, and things like that, just from having 5 different things going on at once. It's been clutch for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a great answer. That's really fun. Like you're bringing up, see, this is another reason why I love this platform, because like I've never even heard of what you're talking about right now. So now I have to like take it upon myself to learn about these open source looping systems that are out there and could potentially benefit my diabetes protocols. So I'm stoked because I'm learning as we go here, guys. This is excellent.
And I think you made a good point, though, is like the fact that you say you have to go learn about it, right? Because I can't say like it's going to work for you. I can't say it's going to work for Josh. I can't say anything because I don't actually know. But like I heard about it myself a few years ago. And I was like, you know what? I wasn't stoked on like the aggressiveness of the pump I was using. So I was like, what can I do to just have to think about diabetes less? And I was like, okay, let's go read 1,000 pages of documentation and go figure out how to like build an app on my phone from this cloned Git repository, which if you're not a software engineer is probably complete mumbo jumbo to all of you guys. But like you have to go learn about it. And then because I had to learn about it, that means that I was able to like actually understand what it was going to do. I mean, for the most part, there's still a lot of nuances that you learn, but kind of what I was mentioning earlier, right? Like you kind of experience or experiment on a baseline, and then from there you just kind of like get to tweak it and refine and make everything better once you have that base level of knowledge.
That's
It's
awesome,
been
guys.
fun.
It's huge.
Yeah, I think that kind of brings us, man. We've unpacked a lot of details. This is freaking awesome. This kind of brings us into the next episode, which is going to be the debrief of this Unbound 200. We've heard your guys' protocols, we've heard your goals, we've heard your challenges, some of your challenges leading up to the race. Alex, I'm thinking about you right now. And so let's wrap this thing and just I look forward to hearing the results of the race, the wins, the losses, the struggles, and the lessons that are undoubtedly going to be learned from your guys' race. And so with that, is there anything you guys want to hit on before we close this one off?
I'd like to formally request that instead of waiting to record the debrief one, we just pretend it already happened, and I get to talk all about how successful it was, because I have a suspicion there's going to be a lot of things that are going to go wrong, but it'll still be fun.
It's a big day.
That's awesome, man. That's how we get better. We're gonna learn a lot from Alex. I can already tell in the next episode.
Yeah.
If I'm mentally even alive at that point.
We'll probably be a little cracked, but it'll be worth it. I'm excited.
Heck yeah. Well, best of luck to you both. I'll be paying attention and cheering you on. And like I said, I can't wait to reconnect on the next episode and hear how it goes. And unpack some of the things that we can all learn together from the event.
Sounds like a plan.
Let's do it.
Looking forward to it.
All right.
All right.
Good luck, guys.
Appreciate it. See y'all.